All right, as we transition from one session to the next, I'm excited about these next colleagues of mine. So these are all supply chain faculty, Dr. Rod Thomas, Dr. Stephanie Thomas, and Dr. Brent Williams. I just want to say one thing about this. The topic that they're discussing in retail media networks, I've never heard Dr. Rod Thomas be as excited to talk about a topic that has relevancy to supply chain. And while this may not seem like it's a topic that is related to supply chain, it certainly does. So, Mrs. Dr. Thomas, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can lead it from here.
Thank you, Donnie. I am excited to be here as part of the supply chain faculty representing those that still support the hair care industry. So, if you need a spokesman, I'm happy to be there for you. So super excited to be here with our soon-to-be interim dean, Brent Williams, that you guys all heard a lot about this morning. And then Rod Thomas, who is also my better half. And I appreciate Matt Waller kind of teasing this session earlier this morning. And so I have the privilege of teaching 8 a.m. classes. And a lot of times I have the privilege of having early to mid-afternoon sessions at events, and I realized that's a terrible place to be. So I'm gonna make you guys move for a little bit. How many of you, and please stand up, have heard the phrase retail media networks? Stand up if you've heard it. Okay, I needed a lot more of y'all to move than that. Well, the good news is, y'all are gonna get to do some educating today. So the next question was going to be how many of you know a lot about it and how many of you are using it for supply chain operations. I think we've got some learning to do. And so Rod, Brent, and I had the opportunity to work on a project in this space. And Brent, I know it's a big initiative of the Walton College to be thought leaders. So can you kind of talk about how do we even get into this retail media stuff and what even is it?
Yeah, happy to. Well, you mentioned being a thought leader as the Walton College of Business. If you look at our vision, really it breaks down to two elements. It breaks down to being a thought leader in business and being a catalyst for transforming lives. And one of the ways that we pursue thought leadership, of course, is through our research and then specifically research where we're engaging with industry. And this is a result of that. When you look at our mission statement, you look at our three strategic areas, it's analytics, entrepreneurship, and retail. So this project made a lot of sense for us. It really came about, I was probably in the same boat that you're in about less than a year ago. You know, not many of you stood up and said, oh, I know a lot about this. Well, I was in the same spot, and I think Rod was too. By the way, I refute that he's the better part of the half. I was approached by Andy Murray. I suspect many of you know Andy. Andy was a longtime member of the Northwest Arkansas community, is still retired as Chief Customer Officer of ASDA, and then came back and engaged with us and is leading our customer centricity initiative in the Walton College, really trying to grow customer centricity throughout the different majors in the college. And he came to me, we had lunch, and said, I think this retail media thing is really about to blow up. I think the Walton College needs to be a part of this in some way, shape, or form. You know, and really we're talking about, I mean, you know, simply put, you know, I just think about it as a retail media network being, you know, I guess a retailer using its digital real estate, digital and physical real estate in order to be able to touch the consumer and to be able ultimately to configure solutions for that consumer and preferences. And I mean, that's boiling it down to a really, really basic level.
Sure, and so Rod, as Donnie said, you've been very excited about being part of this project. And I will say that as this project, we did do kind of an interdisciplinary research, which sometimes we don't get to do. So we did work with some of our marketing colleagues, Molly Rapert being one of those. Why did you jump on board with the opportunity to get involved in this space? Because you didn't know any more about it than either of us did.
Yeah, originally because Brent told me to.
Always a smart thing.
Yeah, and I'm a retailer at heart, so I thought it was really cool, but I remember saying to him at the time, this is really interesting, but it has nothing to do with supply chain. It's a marketing and sales thing. So don't leave here thinking that. If nothing else, I want you to come out of here realizing retail media networks can really help enhance supply chains. Let me explain a little bit more about what it is. It's a business model that's very advertising heavy, where suppliers have the opportunity to market their products both online and offline. And that's stuff they've always been able to do. But it's enhanced by first-party data, our sales history, and closed-loop reporting, where they can give you actual reports on how effective something is. Contrast that with a Google or a Facebook. They know what we search and what we're exposed to. They don't know what we buy. Retail media networks have this rich either loyalty program history or your search history. They know what you looked at, what you were exposed to, and what you bought. So there's an online retailer on the other coast that's pretty good at this. That's been their business model. They can tell their suppliers, for every dollar you invest with us, we're going to give you 3, 4, 5x return, and then they can run the report and show them. It is micro-targeted. It is a better understanding of our consumer behavior than ever before. It is SKU-specific, person-specific, location-specific at a level of detail that we've never seen. And I think there's tremendous supply chain implications for that. Are we at that point to go into that? Or go ahead.
Well, I can share a little bit about, some of the learnings of that first project, because Rod has really driven the piece of the work that is around, like, what are the supply chain implications of this? And so the study, it's out there on our website, it's published on Walton Insights, is really when we as academics start in this spot of knowing nothing, really the first thing we do is go do interviews and talk to practitioners. So we talked to about 20 people in the industry in in-depth interviews, and then we code those and basically try to pull out the themes. And so the structure of the work was really, what's the promise? Because there has been a lot of promises made about what retail media networks could do. There was the reality of where they were currently, and then there was a bit of the path of, like, how do we get from the current reality of these to ultimately how can they meet the promise for the consumer, for the brand, and for the retailer. And, we boiled it down. There were a lot of things mentioned. We boiled it down to a few really interesting things about retail media networks that we felt like, if collaborated upon, and this goes back to the panel earlier, and I think Matt originally started this conversation about the need for increased integration and collaboration. But if collaborated upon, maybe we could start to see more of the promise from the retail media networks. And the first really interesting part of this, I think, and Rod, I think you felt the same way. We termed it taking a customer orientation, but the interesting thing about retail media networks is that the brand is the customer of the retailer. Right, and that's a completely different dynamic than what we are used to. But the retailer is selling its services to the brand, and so just for retailers to now be able, retailers broadly, and I think at the time that we did that work, there were 600 of these networks that had been stood up to some degree. I'm sure that number has changed. I'm sure it's more at this point, most likely. But that was an interesting dynamic that both the brand and the retailer were going to have to get their head around and have to understand how they operate in that paradigm. Another was just the capabilities were still needed to be developed. I think our finding, or our sense was, probably is the better way to put that there were a few retailers that were really leading with the capabilities that were needed. But while many had been stood up and many were stood up quickly, there was still some work to be done on the capabilities. And by capabilities, I think we really mean the tools and the insights and the capabilities to really deliver on closed-loop reporting, which over and over, maybe in almost every interview, was really, that's what came up as a key to making retail media networks fulfill their promise. Another interesting, I think, finding from that work was the need, and this really came more on the brand side, for brands to think about how are they going to approach this from an investment strategy. We heard a variety of strategies around it. Some was this is just a pure another marketing expense, and maybe we're going to move some of our ad spend from point A to point B, and that's the way we thought about it. Some viewed it as R&D, at least for a period of time, and it seemed like picking the way that you were going to approach this. Were you going to sort of wait and see? When the capabilities get there, I as a brand will be ready to jump in and start utilizing it more, or did I really believe in this and I wanted to be a leader in it and view it as R&D? And then the final one, we talked about this a little bit this morning, was the need for deeper organizational integration. And I think that actually means for the retailer, for the brand, and between the retailer and the brand. So from a retailer standpoint, there has to be deeper integration between the merchandising teams and the media teams. But then interestingly on the brand side, right, it started to blur the lines between, where the marketing team has always played with the retailer and then where the sales team fits into that. And all of a sudden, you're thinking about both teams going to the retailer and then the retailer coming to both teams. And so it was a strange dynamic that was playing out, that it was clear that organizationally there needed to be additional work done on how to integrate these functions.
Absolutely, and it was a fascinating project to be part of. Now, along the way after these interviews, and we were kind of talking about what we found out of it, I know, Rod, you really started going, wait a second, there's other potential here beyond some of what Brent just shared. So can you kind of transition us into how is this not just a marketing thing?
Yeah. So assume all the problems that Brent just talked about are fixed. Think into the future. You have this incredible micro-targeted marketing capability where you can dial up or dial down sales. Imagine if we take that understanding, those retail media insights, and pair those up with our inventory knowledge or our supply chain capacity constraints. You get a very powerful demand shaping tool that you can use to rebalance localized supply and demand. For example, old school. I was a retailer 20 years ago. We knew we had an ad coming out. We'd flood inventory out into the stores. We had to say whether we had enough or not. System-wide, we probably did, but not at every store. So we had to make a decision on whether we need to pull the ads or not. With a retail media network, at each store what that lift is supposed to be on that SKU for a certain segment of customers. And if all the stores out there are fine, let it run. But if there's some customers, their stores don't have adequate stock, let's turn the retail media down. Let's not market to them. You could send it to each individual in here or not, depending on what type of inventory is available in that store. You optimize your advertising investment because you no longer are sending customers to stores where you don't have adequate stock to support them. You optimize your inventory investment because you are dialing up additional foot traffic, sales, whatnot, to the locations that have it available. So inventory is piece number one. I think you can do the same thing with capacity. Imagine as a supplier, you come out of your internal sales and operations planning meeting. You learn that one of the factories in one of your regions, 2 of the lines have excess capacity for the next month. Capacity is one of those typically use it or lose it type things. I can see a point in time where that's where you go to certain retailers and say, we want to do more customized advertisements just on these items, just in these stores that are served by those lines. Again, you're matching up supply and demand availability. You're reshaping demand, not just to drive sales, but to drive profitable sales on the things that you have supply and operational control over. Jump in here when you want, Brent. Piece number 3, from a forecasting perspective. There's some companies that have gotten so good at this, they'll send you items. You've bought with them online for so long, they know what your demand patterns are, they can predict your needs. 5 years ago, they would ship you stuff and just say, hey, we know you're gonna need this. If you don't, then you don't have to pay for it. But they're getting really good at this micro-targeted forecasting at the individual level or at the individual lift of who's more prone to advertisements, okay? I don't care for them, right? I say I don't. I don't think I do. I don't like them. But I know somebody else, if you offer any type of special,
Especially hair care products.
she's hooked. Yes, yes. And then the fourth piece, and these are just 4 initial ideas. I'm sure there are plenty of others, and I'd love to hear from everybody. Think about any time you have some type of inventory transition, a reset schedule, a seasonal transition, something where you got to swap out a bunch of inventory in a quick period of time. Historically, what do? Buybacks, markdowns, destroying the field, something like that. Imagine if Trimmetry is out there in the stores, Christmas decorations and trees, and you're getting to that point where traditionally you might start to think about markdowns to sell through that stuff before the spring items come in. Retail media networks know there's somebody that's going to buy a tree every year. All you got to do is dangle a carrot in front of them. Well, in that store, on those items where they're a little fat, send something to Stephanie to turn the dial up. On other stores where they already have enough sell-through, turn the dial down. So again, you're matching up this idea of supply and demand at a micro-targeted level, and I could see easily a time where systematically it does it in real time. You take out a lot of the communication lags that we've historically had, where I can remember when I was in replenishment, it would drive me nuts. Like, don't advertise something unless you give us 6 weeks notice. We got to have adequate time to tell the suppliers and the carriers and the DC to get all this extra stuff out into the store. What do you do if you have a great deal coming up in a short period of time where you don't have enough to do that? You just send it out to the certain customers, certain store locations, certain items where it makes sense. Okay. So to me, that's why I got really excited about retail media networks. Is it is demand shaping at a very micro-targeted level by a customer, by SKU, by location that I don't think we've ever seen before.
Brent, do you have anything you want to add to that?
It was pretty good. Only that, you know, our viewpoint on this is maybe it's probably 4 to 5 months old-ish since the work was completed. And thus, you know, I think the space is moving really fast. I'm sure there may be some of you in the room that your companies are actually making progress toward this. I think what Rod is describing is it certainly appears to be possible. It doesn't appear to be widely adopted yet. While neither of us went to Shop Talk, Andy did kind of report back and say, hey, there was this small group of folks at Shop Talk that were really talking about some use cases that were starting to happen. So I think there's a lot to be done and learned in this space.
Let me jump in on that real quick. They're starting to talk about it at the advertising conferences, and they're doing it as an advertising tool. They're looking at it through the eyes of, we don't want to waste advertising dollars on stores that are out of stock. We need to partner with these people. We can't lose this, right? If this stays a marketing and sales tool, we're going to miss out on the bigger supply chain picture. I would encourage you to go integrate with them as much as you can, learn more about it. I could see a point in the future where some of the biggest users, not necessarily paying customers, but some of the biggest users of retail media are going to be internal supply chain folks to ramp up inventory up or down, or ramp up capacity up or down. Everybody we talk to, there's over 600 retail media networks. The reality is they're not all going to survive. It's going to be a handful of the usual suspects that'll end up surviving. But I don't think those other 550, 560 are going to go away. They can just use them differently.
So I know this is kind of a newer topic or idea. I know Rod and Brent were interested to see, what are you guys thinking? You know, does anybody have any questions? Do you have any comments or thoughts? Because again, we're kind of new, fresh eyes on this too, so we're looking for anybody else's perspective or questions. So Donnie would be more than happy to bring you a microphone.
Mark.
There were 500 hands, Donnie.
Hey, Mark,
I mean,
it's been a long time. Good to see you.
Too long. As a long-term supply chain person as well, it's exciting to see demand, the opportunity for demand shaping to be communicated into supply chain ahead of the purchase. You mentioned inventory excess or bulges as opportunities to more strategically or tactically get that to consumers who want the product. Moving freight, isn't a real good option at any level of the supply chain, but certainly once it's down to store, it's pretty much going to get a markdown, right, if it doesn't sell. And I wonder, is there any research yet on that part of the equation where rather than taking markdowns, there's an opportunity to be proactive on retail where inventory bulges exist, so kind of an inverted or the other side of the coin from what you're describing on inventory opportunity?
I can see a point. Let's use golf shirts. They go out of season at a certain point. They want to transition to something else, the winter stuff. Well, typically they go into markdown. And you might get an ad, hey, all golf shirts are X% off. Well, I show up and it's extra small and medium. That ain't working for me, right? Well, that's in that store. Well, they probably should have sent that ad not to everybody, just to Brent, who's going to need a medium. And on something else, the big guy that needs 2 X's, send me an ad on what they have excess on that prior to the markdown piece, right? And they'll know which ones of us are more receptive to advertisements because they'll have that closed loop reporting, that close rate. Maybe it doesn't work on me, it works great on Brent. Maybe it doesn't work on you as well, but it works great on Stephanie. They're not going to waste an ad on me and you, but they'll send them to them for those items in those sizes, in those colors that they have a proclivity for. I don't think markdowns are going to ever completely go away, but you can dramatically reduce some of your exposure on those types of things. I think Chris earlier said, inventory levels are going down on A items, but C and D, we're a little fat. Hopefully, at some point, we can turn the dial up on retail media on that to help with that a little bit at some point. The reality is a dog item is going to be a dog item. Some of those, no matter how much you mark them down, they're not going to move. But it at least gives us another tool where we might be able to make a difference. We might be able to do a better job of rebalancing supply and demand on each SKU in each store. Go ahead, Brent, if you have anything.
Great question. Next.
So traditionally, we've seen that digital advertising has been the domain of marketing, like they control the budget, the spends. So how do you overcome the obstacles of we in supply chain know where to have the capacity or the inventory, but it's going to be their budget? Or how do we best share where to have the opportunities in a way that is not just I send them an email, how do I do it in my SNOP, and then how is the budget considerations take place? Have you seen some good examples of that?
Me or you? Marketers want satisfied customers. And at the end of the day, you got to sell them, but your customers are not going to be satisfied if you advertise a widget, they go to the store to get the widget, and it's not there. And they're starting to see that. That one's not a tough sell. I think the other one of how do we shape demand to match up with internal or external capacity, that might be a little bit different. But again, all right, marketers, if you help us do this on the capacity side of things, that's going to drive down cost. You can play with retails a little bit. There's this interconnected nature of the supply side of the business and the demand side of the business. I think you got to have some smart, savvy people. You probably have some executive leadership on this. It's not a tough sell, though, right? Demand shaping makes sense. You're going to increase customer satisfaction, you're going to increase service, and reduce cost. That violates one of the basic trade-offs we teach in textbooks. Typically, to get better service, it costs you more money. I think the reason I'm so excited about demand shaping in this micro-targeted level is it'll violate that basic assumption or that basic trade-off in very advantageous ways that normally we don't see.
That's good.
But I think what you're talking about, though, is human behavior and relationships. A lot of times we get so tunnel visioned and so focused on where we are, and that is trying to help educate and change people. It's like, hey, maybe the way we've been doing it isn't the best way. Or maybe there is, when we talked about the try earlier, why don't we try this and see what happens? And it's trying to come to the table with that conversation and not waiting for the conversation potentially maybe to eventually get to you.
Other questions? I was really hoping we were going to have any more and I could cold call on somebody. Connolly, I'm thinking of you.
No cold call today, hopefully. We've blended a couple concepts. When we think about in-store retail media targeting, we have awareness versus acquisition-based marketing. So when we have awareness, we're testing new products. CPGs come out with something new. They're trying to get demand forecasting. Acquisition is actually targeted. That's really heavily digital and omni-channel focused. I worked for a certain retailer with a bullseye for a logo for some time, and now I've gone to the other side here in Bentonville. But when we think about, I was working on a beacon project 5-6 years ago, and it was unanimously panned for how micro-targeted it was, to the point that consumers actually hated it, that they would walk into a store, 2 for $10 LaCroix, and they're like, this is too creepy. So like, how do we balance awareness versus acquisition? You know, having a machine learning background, I'm on the other side of the spectrum, but there's this push and pull. I think COVID has alleviated a lot of that concern, but the security aspect is something that we really have to balance, and I wanted to get the academic stance on that.
Well, I don't know that we have a better answer than you do at all. I will say this: the too creepy concept did come up a great deal during the discussions that we had in the early phases of doing the interviews, and it does seem like consumers have moved a little bit, where it's not as creepy maybe as it was, but when we first talked about take Rod, like, he was the most creeped out, of anybody I've seen by this.
No big brother.
But it was certainly a concern. I don't know exactly how you address it outside of just trying to, I think, trial and error, with the ads in order to try to understand the customer and how they're going to react to that. But I don't know if there's a silver bullet answer to that question.
Can I jump in?
It's a really good one, though.
It's going to come down to market segmentation. There are some customers that love this customized personal attention. Oh, yes, you're giving me exactly what I want in the right size and the color and style. They love it. Then there's other segments, and I think I'm in the minority, like,
The dinosaurs
that don't want that. So basic marketing says you got to do a little bit of segmentation. Your other part about awareness versus the closure, Andy Murray talks a lot about that. Is this an upper funnel tool? Is this a lower funnel tool? And the more we see, more coming out of conferences and whatnot, it's both. It's not just an upper funnel or lower funnel marketing aspect. I know some people in here might not know what that is, but upper funnel, and jump in here and correct me because I'm not a pure marketer, it's more awareness, building the brand. Lower funnel is getting them to actually buy.
I'm not a marketer either. I'm a services company that works for marketers, but I'm the nerd that builds the technology for them. But typically, awareness marketing is not customer specific. It's trying to test demographic, geolocation, regional, seasonality. A good example, worked at General Mills. They came out with a sausage waffle thing. They wanted to go to gas stations and Walmart to have that. Testing that was all awareness-based marketing, dollar off. They didn't know anything about the customer. They just wanted to see if people bought it. Yep. Acquisition is you have some enticement. You have some longitudinal data that you can convert into more longitudinal data for that customer. Just kind of backing up, the way we got around that beacon problem was seasonality. Knowing that seasonality trends drive that, you can put that into different cohorts to go from top down to bottom. But again, the creepiness aspect of it is a tricky balance.
Well, and a lot of the interviews we did, the younger generation is way less creeped out. So as they get older and take over more of us, then that becomes less, of an issue.
Yeah, and I know we've got like 1 minute left. So if this is of interest, there's a few ways to learn more in at least the Walton ecosystem. One is the QR code for these papers. The one that says white paper was the first one, which was much more of an overview of what we learned from those interviews. The second is published in Supply Chain Management Review. I think it was published in January, if I remember correctly, and it is much more focused on the 4 factors that are going to we think, have an impact on supply chains. And then we've mentioned Andy a couple times. Andy wanted to be here. He's actually facilitating an event around retail media networks in Atlanta today. But he is the chair of what we call the Customer-Centric Leadership Initiative at the Walton College. And Andy puts out great content. In fact, I think there's some podcasts that would be on our website that he truly is an expert in this. And we're fortunate to have someone like that engaging with our students to help them see the state of the art. But those would just be a few resources if this caught your interest.
And one more, if any of you are doing this, or even dipping your toe into it, we'd love to talk to you, build some case studies and learnings. If any of you want to experiment with it and try a field test, love to talk to you and work with you on that as well.
Thank you, Rod and Brent. And thank you all for your time and your questions. We'll turn back over to Donnie.